The bell above the diner door gave a soft chime as it opened, letting in a gust of cold morning air and the smell of diesel from the parking lot. Heads turned automatically, that small-town reflex when someone new walks in. The woman who stepped through didn't look like a stranger, but she didn't belong either. Her walk was uneven, slow. Each step was deliberate, the weight balanced carefully on one good leg. She wore a faded marine jacket, the kind issued years ago, the kind you don't wear unless you've earned it. A scar cut across the right side of her neck, vanishing beneath her collar. Her hair was tied back in a regulation bun, habit, not style, and her eyes were hidden behind aviator shades that didn't quite hide the exhaustion beneath them. She took the far corner booth, facing the door. Old instincts. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a soft smile, brought over coffee without being asked. Cream and sugar? Black's fine, the Marine said, her voice even, quiet. The waitress nodded. Haven't seen you around before. Passing through? Something like that. She gave a polite nod, then focused on the window, where the reflection of the diner's neon sign shimmered against the glass. At the counter, 3 men in tactical hoodies were laughing over their breakfast plates. Contractors, the kind who hung around bases pretending they were still in the fight. Their voices carried easily across the room. See the limp on that one? One of them muttered. His buddy smirked. Yeah, bet she tripped over her own rifle in boot. They chuckled loud enough for it to land. The Marine didn't move. She didn't even blink, but 2 tables over, a group of men in plain clothes went silent. 6 of them, all with the same bearing, straight-backed, watchful, hair cropped close. They didn't need name tags or uniforms to tell the story. Navy SEALs. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with dark eyes and a calm presence, looked up from his coffee. His gaze lingered on the patch on the Marine's jacket, half-faded but unmistakable. Task Force Orion. His hand tightened around his mug. He remembered that name. Everyone in Special Operations did. At the counter, the laughter continued. You'd think they'd stop letting the broken ones wear the uniform, the first contractor said, shaking his head. It's bad for recruiting. A few nearby customers looked uncomfortable. The waitress froze mid-step. The Marine finally lifted her eyes. Calm, unreadable. Then she said softly, "You finished?" The man blinked, unsure if she was serious. "Excuse me? I asked if you were finished." Her tone was steady, not confrontational, but something about it made the air heavier. He smirked. "Just talking, lady. You don't gotta get all tough." At the SEALs table, the man with the dark eyes set his cup down. "Say that again," he said quietly. The words didn't carry far, but somehow, everyone heard them. The contractors turned. "What's your problem, man?" The SEAL stood up slowly. His t-shirt clung to his frame, the trident tattoo barely visible on his forearm. "My problem," he said, voice calm, "is you running your mouth about a Marine who's done more for this country than you ever will." The other SEALs rose with him. One by one, silent but unmistakably united. The room went still. Forks stopped clinking. Even the waitress stepped back. The contractor looked around, realizing too late who he was talking to. "Hey, we were just joking." The SEAL's expression didn't change. "Then laugh," he said quietly. "Go ahead. Let's all see if it's still funny." No one laughed. The only sound left was the hum of the ceiling fan and the slow drip of coffee from a forgotten pot behind the counter. 2 years earlier. Helmand Province, Afghanistan. A valley of dust, heat, and echoing gunfire. Sergeant Elena Cortez, red to her unit, crouched behind a crumbling wall, rifle pressed tight against her shoulder. Her radio crackled with overlapping voices, each one shouting coordinates, each one losing signal mid-sentence. "Bravo 1, do you copy? We're pinned, East Ridge, multiple contacts." "Copy!" she hissed into her mic. "Hold your fire till I mark targets." "Stay low." The world around her shook as a mortar landed just 30 yards away. Sand and shrapnel peppered her face. She gritted her teeth and crawled toward a wounded corporal screaming nearby. His leg was gone below the knee. She didn't look away. didn't hesitate. She tore her belt off, made a tourniquet, cinched it down until he passed out. Then she kept moving. Her squad was down to 4 Marines. Outnumbered, cut off, surrounded. The rescue birds had been rerouted. Reinforcements delayed, and the Taliban fighters were closing in. "Red, they're flanking!" Private Keenan shouted, voice breaking through the static. "I see 'em." She swapped mags, fired 3 clean bursts. 2 silhouettes dropped in the distance. Another mortar landed. She felt something hot tear through her thigh. For a moment, her vision blurred. Black and red edges colliding. She fell. Looked down. Shrapnel. Deep. Her leg screamed, but her mind stayed cold. "I'm fine," she said aloud to no one. "I'm fine." She pulled herself up, dragging her leg, moving to the corporal's side. The comms were dead now, just the sound of wind and gunfire. That's when she saw them. Through the dust, through the chaos. 6 figures moving in formation across the ridge. Not Taliban. Different posture, faster, and then, through the static, a new voice cut in. "Task Force Orion, this is SEAL Team 9. We've got your signal. Sit tight." She could have cried right there. Minutes later, the sky erupted with thunder. An Apache gunship screamed overhead, laying down fire. The SEALs moved in from the flank, silent and precise, ghosts in the dust. But they wouldn't have found them if not for her. Even half-conscious, Cortez had dragged each wounded Marine into a tighter perimeter, marked their location with smoke, and broadcasted coordinates manually on a short-range transmitter. It was her signal that led the SEALs straight to them. "Which one's red?" the SEAL leader asked as he crouched beside her, scanning for targets. She looked up, bleeding, hands still steady on her rifle. "You're standing in my kill zone," she muttered. He couldn't help but grin. Noted, the SEALs took over the fight. One of them offered to carry her out, but she refused. "Take him," she said, nodding toward the corporal. "I can walk." She couldn't, not really, but she did anyway. By the time the medevac landed, the valley was silent. The enemy had been wiped out, and the legend of Redline Cortez was born, the Marine who'd bled out her own strength to save the men around her. A week later, in the field hospital, the SEAL leader visited her. He didn't salute. He didn't smile. He just placed a single Navy Trident patch on her bedside table and said quietly, "You ever need us, we stand with you." She never forgot that. Back in the present, at the diner, the SEAL who stood up to defend her was that same man, Lieutenant Jack Carter. He remembered the valley, the blood, and the way she refused morphine until every one of her Marines was stabilized. Now, watching her sip coffee in silence, while those idiots laughed, he knew exactly what kind of woman she still was. The diner was so quiet you could hear the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint sizzle of bacon on the griddle. Every eye in the room was locked on the confrontation at the counter. 3 contractors frozen mid-sentence, 6 SEALs standing like shadows behind them, and the wounded Marine who hadn't flinched once. Jack Carter's gaze stayed level. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence, the calm authority that only came from too many battlefields, did the talking for him. The contractor shifted nervously on his stool. "Look, man, we were just joking around." "Didn't mean anything by it." Carter didn't blink. "There's a difference between a joke and disrespect." One of the SEALs stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "You know what that patch means on her shoulder? Task Force Orion? That unit saved my squad outside Kandahar. You're breathing because of people like her." The waitress, still holding the coffee pot, looked from one man to the next, her hands trembling slightly. She'd worked this diner 20 years and never seen a scene like this. Soldiers and civilians staring across a divide that had suddenly become very real. The Marine, Sergeant Elena Cortez, finally spoke, her voice even, calm, but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Let it go," she said. Carter turned toward her. "Ma'am," she shook her head. "Not worth it. I've been called worse by better men." The contractor looked at her, guilt mixing with embarrassment. "Ma'am, I didn't realize—" "That I can hear?" she said, one eyebrow raised. or that I can bleed like anyone else." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. She set her cup down gently, the clink echoing louder than it should have. Then she leaned back in her seat, her left leg stretched stiffly under the table, the one that had never healed right. "I didn't come here to make anyone uncomfortable," she said. "I came here because it's the only diner that still makes real coffee." Someone chuckled awkwardly in the back. No one else dared to. Carter folded his arms. "You don't have to take that kind of disrespect, Red." That nickname, Red, made her glance up. Only a handful of people still called her that. "It's fine, Jack. They don't know." Then maybe they should. He looked around at the contractors, his voice low but carrying across the room. "You ever been trapped in a kill zone, bleeding out, and someone comes crawling through bullets to drag your sorry hide out of there?" She did that. She lost half her squad and still went back for the wounded. So, before you run your mouth about her limp, remember, she earned that limp. The man at the counter swallowed hard. The waitress quietly refilled the Marine's cup, not meeting anyone's eyes. Helena took a slow sip, as if the whole thing didn't matter. But Carter could see it. The tightness in her jaw, the quiet tension behind her calm expression, the kind that came from years of swallowing pain. Finally, she said softly, "You don't have to defend me, Jack." He met her gaze. "Maybe not. But somebody should." She nodded once, her voice steady. "Then do it for someone who still needs it. I made my peace a long time ago." And with that, she turned back to her coffee, the conversation, and the laughter, dead in the air. The SEALs didn't sit down yet. They stayed standing, silent sentinels around her booth, until the contractors lowered their eyes and muttered quiet apologies. Then, and only then, did the SEALs return to their seats. But no one in the diner, not one person, went back to eating. The diner's bell chimed again as the door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and the sound of boots against tile. Everyone turned to look. 2 Marines stepped in, both still in uniform, dust clinging to their sleeves, like they'd just come from the field. Their eyes swept the room, then locked on Elena Cortez. "Sergeant Cortez?" one of them asked. She looked up slowly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Yeah?" The taller of the two saluted, crisp and sharp. "Ma'am, we've been trying to reach you for days." "Command sent us. You're needed back at Quantico." The diner went silent again, this time from surprise. The contractors shifted uneasily. The same men who'd mocked her a few minutes earlier now sat frozen, unsure whether to stand, apologize again, or just disappear. Carter stepped forward. "What's going on?" The Marine looked at him, recognizing the rank insignia on his chest. "Sir, orders came directly from General Reese. He said, quote, 'If Sergeant Cortez is found, tell her the board won't proceed without her.'" Elena blinked. "The review board?" "Yes, ma'am. Medal of Honor hearing." They moved it up. The contractor's jaws dropped. One of them whispered under his breath, "Medal of Honor?" Carter just smiled faintly. Half pride, half vindication. "Guess now they know." Elena shook her head slightly, her tone dry. "You just ruined my coffee, Corporal." "Sorry, ma'am," he said quickly, not sure if she was joking. She sighed and stood up slowly, her limp pronounced but her back straight as ever. "Let's go then." Can't keep the brass waiting. The SEALs stood as well, almost instinctively, their respect silent but unmistakable. As she gathered her jacket, one of the contractors finally found the courage to speak. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't know." Elena turned to him, her expression calm but unflinching. "That's the problem. Too many people don't know what sacrifice looks like until it's wearing a medal." He nodded, his face red with shame. Carter tossed a few bills on the counter, covering her tab. "Coffee's on me, Red." She gave a faint smile. "You always did have good timing." As she headed toward the door, the SEALs moved aside, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Respect, unspoken but absolute, filled the air. When she reached the door, she turned back briefly. "Jack?" He looked up. She held his gaze. "Tell them. Tell the young ones to stop laughing at what they don't understand." Then she was gone, boots crunching on gravel, the two Marines following behind. The bell jingled once more, and the sound lingered longer than it should have. For a moment, the whole diner stayed frozen. The same men who had mocked her now sat in silence, their coffee untouched. The waitress finally exhaled. "Medal of Honor," she whispered. And she was just sitting there. Carter nodded, a quiet pride in his eyes. "Yeah, that's what heroes do. They sit right next to you, and never tell you who they are." He looked out the window, watching the convoy disappear down the dusty road, then, almost to himself, he added, "And they never need to." 3 days later, the Pentagon auditorium was packed. Rows of uniforms, Army green, Marine crimson, Navy blue, filled the room like a sea of order and discipline. Cameras lined the back, their lenses glinting under the harsh lights. At the center of the stage stood Sergeant Elena Cortez, flanked by 3 generals and a single wooden podium. The Medal of Honor lay on a velvet cushion beside her, gleaming, waiting. She looked uncomfortable. Not from pain, though the stiffness in her leg was clear, but because she'd never liked this kind of attention. She'd been trained to lead from the mud, not from a microphone. General Reese, a towering man with silver hair, spoke first. "There are stories that remind us why we wear this uniform. And then there are people like Sergeant Cortez, who are the story." A low murmur of respect rippled through the crowd. He continued, voice steady. 2 years ago, near Al-Kharif, her convoy was ambushed. When enemy fire took out the lead vehicle, she pulled 3 wounded Marines to cover, while wounded herself, then returned to retrieve classified gear before the blast reached it. For actions above and beyond the call of duty, the United States honors her today. He nodded to the aide who stepped forward and placed the ribbon around her neck. The medal shimmered against her uniform. Blue ribbon, golden star, the nation's highest recognition of valor. Applause thundered through the hall, but Elena didn't smile. She waited until the noise faded before stepping up to the mic. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But I didn't come here for applause." The room hushed immediately. Even the cameras seemed to pause. She glanced at the medal, then at the crowd, officers, cadets, journalists, and old war vets who'd seen too much and said too little. "You give a soldier a medal," she said, "and people think they understand what that means. They don't. A medal doesn't tell you about the noise. It doesn't tell you about the smell of burning sand, or the sound of someone calling for help and knowing you can't reach them in time." Her voice didn't waver. "It doesn't tell you about the laughter, the kind you hear when you limp into a diner and someone thinks it's funny. It doesn't tell you about the silence that follows when they finally learn the truth." Several heads lowered. She continued, eyes sharp but calm. "You want to honor veterans? Then listen to them before they wear a medal. Respect the quiet ones, the ones who don't talk about what they did. Because they're the ones who carry the heaviest weight." Her gaze swept across the room, stopping briefly on a few younger Marines in the front row, their eyes wide, faces solemn. "I don't want this to sit in a glass box," she said, touching the medal lightly. "I want it to remind you that heroes don't always look like the posters. Sometimes they just want coffee and peace." The audience was silent, the kind of silence that meant every word had landed where it needed to. Then General Reese stepped forward and saluted her. Slowly, one by one, the entire room followed. Generals, SEALs, privates, all standing in perfect unison. Elena returned the salute. Crisp, precise, and for the first time that day she allowed herself a small, tired smile. Outside, as she left the hall, reporters shouted questions, flashes going off like gunfire. She didn't answer any of them. She just said quietly, to no one in particular, "Now maybe they'll stop laughing." A week after the ceremony, the little roadside diner looked just the same. Faded blue paint, flickering neon sign, and the smell of burnt coffee that seemed to cling to the walls. The same waitress was behind the counter, polishing a mug when a convoy rolled past outside. She didn't even glance up until one of the trucks stopped right in front of the window. A few moments later, the doorbell chimed. Lieutenant Jack Carter stepped in, the same calm presence, his uniform immaculate. He nodded politely to the waitress. "Morning," she smiled. You just missed her again. Carter's brow furrowed slightly. She was here? An hour ago, the waitress said. Sat at her usual spot. Black coffee, no sugar. Left before anyone could bother her, Carter chuckled softly. Sounds like her. He sat down at her booth, the same corner seat near the window, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped there. The dent in the table from her metal ribbon still showed faintly where she'd set it down that one morning, just before heading to D.C. The waitress poured him a cup. You know, after that day, people started showing up here. Soldiers, vets, even kids from the academy. Said they just wanted to sit where she sat. He nodded. She's always been better at inspiring people without trying. Outside, another truck rumbled past, this one with a large poster on the side. Cortez Foundation for Wounded Veterans. Founded by Sergeant Elena Cortez. Carter watched it go by, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She said she didn't want attention, he murmured. Then she built an entire program in her name. The waitress laughed quietly. I think she finally realized attention isn't always a bad thing, if it helps someone else stand a little taller. He looked up at the photos on the diner wall. The owner had framed one of the newspaper clippings from the ceremony. Below it, someone had tacked up a quote on plain printer paper. Respect the quiet ones. They're the reason you still get to laugh. Sergeant Elena Cortez Carter stood, leaving a few bills under his cup. Keep that coffee hot. One day she'll come back and complain it's still weak. The waitress smiled knowingly. I'll be ready. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. The same contractors from that day, the ones who'd mocked her, were sitting in a far booth now, in silence. Their posture was different. Humbled. One of them caught Carter's eye and stood. Sir, he said quietly, we volunteer with her foundation now. Every weekend, Carter nodded once. Good, then you learned something. The man looked down. Yeah, we did. Carter gave him a look that wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was close. Then he pushed open the door and stepped into the sunlight. The wind was cool, carrying the sound of distant laughter from the highway, the kind of laughter Elena would have smiled at. He glanced at the sky, then at the convoy disappearing in the distance, her foundation's logo painted in bold letters. Still changing the world, he muttered. One coffee at a time. Back inside, the waitress poured another cup and set it down in Elena's empty booth, out of habit. Steam curled from the rim, catching the sunlight. And for just a moment, in the quiet hum of the diner, in the warmth of that cup, it almost felt like she was still there, still watching, still teaching, still reminding everyone that true strength doesn't shout. It simply stands.